Hello and welcome to the International Internet Preservation Consortium's Web Archiving Conference. Today is May the 25th. This is session 15 on rapid response methodologies and projects. I'm Tom J. Smyth. I'm the manager of the Web and Social Media Preservation Program at the National Library and Archives Canada, and I'm pleased to be here today to talk about documenting national historic events at Library and Archives Canada. Just a quick note about our legislative context for our program in Canada. This is part of the Library and Archives of Canada Act, Section 8.2, under powers of the librarian and archivist. This is the enabling legislation that has web archiving as a digital preservation activity for the purposes of collecting a representative sample of the documentary material of interest to Canada that is accessible to the public without restriction through the internet. In terms of our program web archival acquisition methodology, we have 5 main activities. The first is comprehensive collection of the Government of Canada web presence, which is the federal web presence, which has gone on since 2005. One of our major activities is the curation of thematic web and social media research collections, which has gone on since 2009. The first time would have been really for the documentation of the Olympics in Vancouver for 2010. The work of which began in 2009. Most pertinently today is the events-based collection in news media. We had a habit back in 2013 of calling them events-based national historic events. We tend to talk about that now as rapid response. In terms of number 4, we do rescue and preservation harvesting of web resources that are at known risk, or resources that are nominated that are being brought to our attention because they're being decommissioned from their web presence. Activity number 5, acquisition of nominated resources. We take nominations internally from other areas of the federal government, but also from the public. So in terms of major historical events and their impact on our program web archival curation methodology, early in the program, around 2011, when we started seeing major historic events occur that we wanted to react to, really back then, just because we were starting out, the reaction to those events was really ad hoc. It largely consisted of scrambling to acquire the best media that documented those issues, Canadian media. We knew very early on that we needed a means to get ahead of these events, which could not by definition be planned, foreseen, anticipated, and which often caused us to stop and to immediately reprioritize resources in order to document these events. In 2016, we began daily harvests of a broad range of news media, and this was to channel those resources to actual curation of pertinent resources rather than just concentrating on the media. So by shifting to a strategy whereby we were collecting major news media from coast to coast in both official languages of Canada, representing different political perspectives, regional perspectives, by scraping the front page news on a daily basis, we knew that this would form the backbone of future major historic events, and was an evolution of our rapid response methodology. So by getting these front page newspapers, and which formed the backbone of the historical timeline and the documenting the events as they unfolded, this methodology was how we first started picking up COVID-19 information, which began in December of 2019. In terms of our project management methodology, this was also very pivotal in terms of our development, because we began with the time allotted, with the resources allotted, beginning to define the themes that we're trying to document within a historical event. What we mean by that is when defining the themes, we also want to set a priority or a sequence. We would use our resources to collect particular themes in, say, descending order of importance, including also their scale or their degree of comprehensiveness, and also defining their quality control level according to our quality control framework. So this probably looks to a lot of folks like basically a library collection development policy approach, which is effectively what we do for each of our curated collections. In so doing, we're defining collection depth indicators for each theme and even every sub-theme. But we also want to make sure that we remain sufficiently responsive in terms of our ability to respond to new scope, to allow that project scope to evolve over time as the historical event itself develops, and as new themes are generated, new resources are generated that may not have been considered at the beginning of in the original project scope. So we wanted to have the ability to evolve as the situation warrants. We also wanted to reduce, for example, the collection of redundant social media across platforms. So sometimes you'll have a key individual or institution that has social media, and effectively what they're doing is reporting the same content on different media platforms. So to another efficiency that we've developed and gained is from collecting the social media from the most reliable platform which would incur the least amount of quality control effort, let's say. We also knew that we wanted to rely on API-based social media collection where possible, particularly Social Feed Manager, but we prefer Twark. So we get a lot of our social media, our Twitter via the API as opposed to harvesting it. Then we did the same thing with social media. We approached that by theme, and we developed a methodology for thematic social media curation collection based on in association with the thematic web archival collection. So we would, for example, conduct some hashtag analysis, determine which hashtags enjoy the most traffic and are most pertinent to the web archival issue or the historical event, and then we would concentrate on collecting those hashtags. In terms of our Canadian news media collection, which has its origins in 2016 as a direct response, as a rapid response methodological development, our collection as we speak comprises some 335 seeds. We've conducted about 4,500 crawls, 656 million objects in the collection as of today is about 18 terabytes and growing daily on the basis of scraping daily front page news. As mentioned, this is the means of providing a timeline of the historical event in terms of what actually occurred as it occurred, which we're getting by documenting the media. This then frees the resources critically to be able to select, curate, evaluate, crawl, conduct quality control on specialized resources having to do that are generated in response to the historical event. In case folks are interested, here's here's some high level details of the newspapers that we collect daily. There's 48 in total, not all of which are done daily because they have different rates of content generation. There's 35 in English, 10 in French, 11 Indigenous, and 2 multicultural, one of which is Chinese, I believe. So these are the titles that we're getting from coast to coast in both official languages of Canada. Here are some examples of previous rapid events that we've documented since early on in the program. Not all of them are here. This is a selection, but this is key events that have arisen in Canada. So for example, the Lac-Mégantic rail disaster that took place in 2013. There was an incident on the Parliament Hill in 2014 that was documented by our program as soon as that event began. There's also the Humboldt Broncos bus accident, which did attract some international attention and was something that was discussed internationally in the news media. Another incident was the mass casualties that took place in Nova Scotia, for which there is now a commission of inquiry in Canada to examine. As some of the issues that arose in the last few years include the Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter movements, also the discovery of unknown, unmarked graves in residential schools in Canada, for which we reacted and documented. And there's also, for example, as a sub-theme of our COVID-19 collection, the trucking convoy protest that occurred in Ottawa, and which was also something of an international, attracted some international attention. On to our COVID-19 collection, which is one of the largest collections we've ever created, being begun in December 2019. This is an overview of the project scope according to the terms that I had discussed earlier. These are the major themes that we were looking to document, each one of which is then assigned, for example, to a team member. That team member would concentrate on curating, selecting, evaluating resources within each individual theme. And some of these themes, of course, came up over time. For example, the protests and alternative perspectives, reactions to the COVID-19 pandemic, and for, let's say, vaccine mandates. Of course, one of the highest documented themes is health science, academic, which would include things like vaccine research. So this is an overview of what we've collected, including things like impact on arts and culture, impact on the business and the economy, and even Indigenous perspectives, and impact, say, on your ability to practice religion. In terms of our thematic Twitter data, we're probably approaching 4 million tweets at this time. This is an overview of the major hashtags that we've collected, having to do with COVID-19 and the dialogue within Canada on Twitter among Canadians in terms of their thinking and reactions to COVID-19 and its impact on Canada. There's even material on the creation and designer artistic expression using masks. There's some content in that in the web archival collection as well. And there was a fair bit of, probably 3/4 of the load of the Twitter data actually is on material coming from the truck convoy protests and their hashtags. So overall, our COVID-19 collection in Canada at LAC, there's some 34 newspapers collected daily, as I said, about over 2,000 individual resources selected, curated, acquired, which are non-media. Those are just other resources about which we'll say a bit just in a few minutes. In terms of the total assets collected to date, we're about 478 million, comprising some over 16 terabytes. And as mentioned, we're approaching 4 million tweets just for COVID. This is a breakdown of the data distribution of the material comprising the COVID collection. As we can see, this is about 41% entire domains. That would include, for example, the provincial domains in Canada, provincial governments. And the news comprises about 11%, and in social media about 8%. I wanted to say a bit about web archival finding aids, which has been of interest in previous talks. In terms of our project management methodology, when we begin a curated collection, as I mentioned, we begin with the scoping document, which is your collection development policy really for that collection, which defines your themes and what kind of effort you're going to put into each one of those themes. So what we like to do is evolve this document over time, not only in response to scope, but also as a closeout document, which resembles like a web archival finding aid. And what we would do is document in this 1 or 2 page document. It would be an overview of the themes, how many seeds are in each theme, what level of quality control they reached. Also things like, so we get an overview of the quality control status, but also you could have, for example, the full seed list. And it would also do things like where we get into specialized and maybe controlled vocabulary for metadata, that would be discussed in this document, so that controlled metadata could then be used to do full text search among that collection. So that was done, for example, for our Truth and Reconciliation Commission in a different collection, which also included specialized LCSH, Library of Congress subject headings. So the metadata details would be reported in this document as well. What you really want to do in such a document is define what is scope in, but also what is deliberately scope out. And the purpose of this document is, of course, to enable a researcher to examine this very short document to determine at a glance whether or not that data will address the research question of the digital humanities and digital historical researcher without having to actually search through it or do all this kind of analysis on their own to determine what is in this data set. So we hope that that would be of interest to folks in the future looking at this collection, and this finding aid will be published alongside the actual collection. Because we want to, well, at the point of our curation, when we're doing these collections, which are both data and historical documentation, we ask ourselves the question: if 20 years down the road, if someone was to sit down and write the history of how COVID-19 impacted Canada, what kind of data and resources do they wish they had as primary source material with which to write that history? So this is what informs our curation, and this is how the program is evolving toward helping the researcher in the actual use of web archival data. In terms of our program future state, we'll continue collecting information related to COVID-19 as long as necessary, hopefully not too much longer. Our Government of Canada Web Archive, which is the public-facing access portal for our web archival collections, is being redesigned as we speak to incorporate some of these services, such as this granular full text search that we will have available upon launch, and that will be available, we hope, in October of 2022. In the near future, we realize that curation of collections, some selection of a subset of all the data that exists within the domain, is not ideal, but is what is possible at this time. But we're very much aware that expanding, progressing to collection of the Canadian domain crawl, which is to say all of .ca, is very important and is something that is now going to be possible, we hope, in the short term. These methodologies are, of course, also used to document the current events in the Ukraine. So that's it, and I'm very happy to address questions in the session, and thanks very much for your time.